couldn't control himself. He just couldn't do it. The harder he pushed, the more images filled his mind with her body. Her body was made to be fucked. And no specific her, just any her. It wasn't like he was in love. He didn't believe in love. He couldn't think. He could barely get out of bed. It was all lust. Every cell, hot, molten lust, bubbling up relentlessly. He remembered being a kid and just breathing sometime. Now he rarely breathed at all. He never touched himself. No, that just wouldn't do. Not okay. Inside, any her was where he needed to be. Now. He felt broken. He felt as though if there were a creator, he somehow botched the plan, made a huge botch of it, that bearded, glowing sandwich board. And although he had all the time in the world to fix his mistake, he just hadn't gotten around to it. Now the man felt the urge to move. He flew from his bed into his tiny kitchen, hoping as he entered that maybe, somehow, it had become a fortress of some kind. He imagined he'd somehow become his 6-year-old self, sitting alone in that little snow cave he'd dug out of the dirty dog shit snow, just sitting there and thinking how good it felt to just be in there alone, just knowing that something beautiful was happening to him. He walked into the kitchen and found that it was not a safe space. He began to look around for something to consume. He walked over to the fridge, and as he grabbed for the handle, his hand became her hand, and the fridge handle was a cock, a gleaming cock. A wonderful cock. He was pushing the oil up and down, and somehow he was floating. He snapped out of it. The fridge was a fridge, and his hand no longer donned the painted nails of some wonderful, feminine alien of which he was far too ugly, inside and out, to ever touch, maybe even to look at. He felt wrong even thinking about something so beautiful. He was, of course, a bottom dweller, and as such, he should not have thoughts of such higher life forms. A Plecostomus should not be thinking about putting his smelly fish member in a glorious angelfish. It just isn't how things are done in the ocean. He grabbed a pot of coffee from yesterday morning and sloshed it into yesterday's mug. This will help, he thought. This will kickstart my day. I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna walk in the sun. It's going to be magnificent. He thought this thought with honest vigor, and then he thought the same thought again, but this time he thought it sarcastically. He took a sip of the old coffee, cold, stale, burnt liquid, flooded his senses. And was that a hint of mold he detected? He drank it anyway. He put the mug down firmly and took a quick, deep breath and felt as though his lungs were barely even a quarter full. At what point had his body lost the ability to breathe? At what point had he begun thinking so much that breathing, the most important aspect of his physiology, had become something only done in passing? And when had his mind become a factory, turning out sex dolls at an alarming rate? He must have been at school when it happened. Must have been sitting there thinking that girls, despite him hating them, had something he needed very badly. Every single day, him cowering the back of the class, literally invisible. Somehow he was inside of his desk, peering through pinholes at beautiful aliens who spoke in tongues. He was a blind, naked mole rat, stroking his cock through his jeans, staring with his blind eyes, but not really seeing. Not really hearing, just stroking his cock through his jeans, slowly and impatiently. And then there was the party. Yes, the party. He wasn't invited, of course. Nobody invited a naked mole rat to a party. Nobody got high with naked mole rats. But he'd overheard the address and the date. And his newly acquired predatory mind had informed him that if there was a party, there would be intoxication. And if there was intoxication, there may be vulnerable women for him to exact his most dire requirements upon. He had arrived late and entered through the back door. No one had noticed him. To them, he was just a pink, hairless blur. He examined the scene and noticed a very much unconscious girl, drooped over a chair as if she was posing for a Renaissance painting of the apocalypse. He recognized her as the funny fat girl, Dorothy McFay. Gazing at her, he thought demons would have no issues entering her body through her large, inviting mouth that was leaking drool that was somehow orange. Maybe she'd eaten a bag of Cheez-Its before losing the ability to stay awake. He skipped over to her. And then realized he had a problem. How was he going to move her to a more private area? He tried to drag her. She fell with a sound that to him sounded like the cooing of a dove. It was hopeless. His malnutrition, mole rat body was no match for her dead weight. He sat down, put his face into his hands, and began to cry. His self-pity was as nearly as overpowering as his need to be inside of Dorothy McFay. After crying for a good 5 minutes, he lifted his face from his hands. The saline tears were burning his acne, and his lust for Dorothy was like the lust of a cheetah chasing an antelope, even though they were both now very still. He looked around the room and realized that the few people left were drunk past the point of being able to do anything. He realized that he could do anything, and nobody here would do anything to prevent him from everything he was about to do. He unbuttoned Dorothy McFay's pants and entered her right there in the living room of some unknown person's house. The only eyes watching him were those of the many family photos on the wall facing him. He looked into their eyes as he did what he had to do. They smiled back lovingly, as if to say, "What you're doing is totally wonderful." And for him, it was. The memory ended abruptly. He was back in a small kitchen. He was 43 years old. It wasn't wonderful anymore. It was all wrong. He tried to conjure up a solution to his predicament and ran through his head the effects of various substances on his disorder. Coffee didn't help. Vodka didn't help. Cannabis definitely did not help. He felt as though at any moment he would begin disintegrating into tiny penises, fluttering around like butterflies looking for virginal flowers to drink from. Then he looked over at the knife block. He looked over at the knife block and was transported to a vision of himself in a hospital bed. He was sitting there like the fucking Dalai Lama, enlightened and fucking not thinking about fucking. He was just sitting there without his genitals, his third eye way open, just floating through the hospital, going to each room and bringing peace to all the sick and dying folks just simply by being there. The bread knife? The paring knife? No, definitely not. It had to be the vegetable chopper. The thing weighed a veritable fuck-ton. It was like a guillotine. He turned away. It's just a thought. Thoughts don't mean anything. We don't have to act on thoughts. That's what makes them thoughts. But he was being drawn to the knife. He was being drawn to the thought that maybe some thoughts are already actions that have already happened, and there's nothing any other thought can do to change that outcome. He pulled out his small, withered worm and placed it on the cutting board. He took the large vegetable chopper. He looked up at God. He imagined God coming down as he had with Isaac and Abraham, and stopping him just before he did the unforgivable act. He imagined himself as a castrated guru, changing the lives of all those he touched. He held that thought in his mind. And he brought down the vegetable chopper. He brought down the vegetable chopper. He brought down the vegetable chopper, and he severed himself from that unholy beast. He brought down the vegetable chopper, and as he did, he took a breath so deep that his lungs felt as though they'd inhaled all the matter in the universe. And when he awoke, he wasn't in the hospital. He was lying on his kitchen floor in a puddle. He stood up, and a tremendous pain emanated from the place his beast had once resided. He found the phone, called 911, and while he waited for the ambulance, he looked down at his lost friend, his comrade in arms, dead, On the floor, a kamikaze pilot. He sat down, put his face in his hands, and began to cry.
Mm-hmm.